I'm Olivia Bennett, 32 years old, and I own a small but successful bakery in Portland, Oregon called Sweet Haven. A week before my father's 65th birthday celebration, he called me with that particular tone in his voice. Warm on the surface but distant underneath, like he was checking off a box on his to-do list rather than actually wanting to connect. "And Olivia, it would really mean a lot to the family if you came to the party," he said, his words careful and measured. "Your sister has worked so hard planning everything. It would be good for everyone if we could all be together." And I hesitated, my stomach already tightening at the thought of another family gathering where I'd feel like an outsider looking in through glass. But despite every instinct screaming at me to decline, I heard myself agreeing, knowing from years of experience that these events always left me feeling invisible and less than, but unable to break the pattern of showing up anyway. NTHAT Saturday night at an upscale Italian restaurant in downtown Portland. The air practically crackled with tension from the moment I walked in. The private dining room was decorated elaborately, too elaborately, with expensive floral arrangements, not from my bakery, I noticed immediately, custom menus, and a jazz trio playing softly in the corner. NMY older sister Natalie stood up halfway through dinner, wine glass held high in her perfectly manicured hand, her smile sharp and calculated as a blade. Before I could even process what was happening or react in any way, she deliberately tilted her glass toward me, and deep red wine splashed across my cream-colored dress, soaking through the fabric instantly and staining it beyond any hope of recovery. "You don't belong in this family," she announced loudly, her voice cutting through the background chatter and music like a knife. "You never have, and honestly, we're all tired of pretending otherwise." NTHE entire room erupted in laughter, harsh, ugly, complicit laughter. Dad looked away, deliberately avoiding my eyes. Natalie's husband, James, actually threw his head back and laughed the loudest. Even my younger brother, Marcus, who I'd thought might defend me, joined in nervously, his eyes glinting with that particular family mockery I'd endured my entire life. NMY face burned with humiliation, but I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me cry or fall apart. I grabbed a cloth napkin from the table, calmly dabbed at the spreading crimson stain on my dress, and stood up with as much dignity as I could gather. Without saying a single word to any of them, I walked out of that restaurant, my heels clicking deliberately on the polished floor, their laughter and whispered comments echoing behind me like a Greek chorus of cruelty. NTHAT night. My heart pounded with a mixture of rage and crystal-clear clarity as I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. My sister Natalie's artisanal jewelry business had been leaning heavily on my financial support for the past 3 years, and I had finally, irrevocably reached my absolute limit. She'd convinced me years ago to invest $15,000 as a silent partner in her startup, promising returns that never materialized, always having excuses about cash flow and market conditions and timing. That money had been propping up her entire operation, covering her supply costs and keeping her afloat when her sales couldn't. And I typed a short, professional email to her business account, my fingers steady, despite the adrenaline and effective immediately. "I am terminating my investment in your company and withdrawing all financial support. Please do not contact me regarding this decision." And I hit send without a moment's hesitation, without a second thought, without any of the guilt that would have paralyzed me even a week earlier. NBY 8 a.m. the next morning, my doorbell was ringing relentlessly, frantically. I opened it to find James, Natalie's husband, standing there with his face pale with obvious panic, his expensive suit already rumpled despite the early hour. I crossed my arms and leaned against the doorframe, my expression deliberately cold. "I'm sorry," I said with icy politeness, "but I don't welcome strangers at my home." "And that's clearly what you are. A stranger who thinks public humiliation is acceptable family behavior." And I shut the door in his face before he could respond, his protests muffled behind the solid wood. "If you've ever felt belittled, dismissed, or humiliated by your own family members, share your story in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe, because this story is just getting started, and the revenge gets so much sweeter." Growing up, I watched my sister Natalie absorb every drop of Dad's attention and praise, like an attention-hungry plant soaking up sunlight. At every single family gathering, holiday dinner, and casual weekend visit, Dad would beam with pride while talking about Natalie's latest venture. her artisanal jewelry business selling handcrafted pieces to boutiques and individual clients through social media. Natalie had an undeniable talent for marketing herself, for turning heads and commanding attention wherever she went. Her confidence was almost blinding in its intensity, the way she could walk into any room and immediately become its center. Meanwhile, my bakery, Sweet Haven, which I'd built from literally nothing over 7 years of grinding, early mornings, and constant hustle, was barely a footnote in Dad's stories about his children. When he mentioned me at all, which wasn't often, he'd wave his hand dismissively and say, "Oh, Olivia's little baking hobby. It's cute, keeps her busy." Not really a serious business, like Natalie's operation, of course. N.A. hobby. 7 years of 4 a.m. wake-ups, of perfecting recipes, of building a loyal customer base, of managing employees and vendors and finances, all dismissed as a cute hobby, while Natalie's perpetually struggling jewelry business was treated like the next great American success story. NMY younger brother Marcus followed Natalie's lead in everything, hanging on her every word, echoing her opinions, treating her pronouncements like gospel truth. James, her husband, was always networking, always looking for the next deal, the next opportunity, his eyes constantly calculating how any situation could benefit him or advance Natalie's interests. And about 3 years ago, Natalie came to me with what she called an incredible opportunity. Her jewelry business needed capital to scale up, new designs, bigger marketing campaigns, a permanent retail space in the Pearl District. She leaned in close across the coffee shop table, her voice smooth and persuasive as silk, promising I'd get a significant cut of the profits if I signed on as a silent investor. "And this is a ground floor opportunity, Liv," she'd said, using the nickname she knew I liked, the one that made me feel like we were actually close. "I've got major boutiques interested. We just need this capital injection to really take off. You'll make back triple your investment within 18 months. I guarantee it." And I hesitated, knowing her track record of empty promises from our entire childhood and adolescence. Natalie was brilliant at starting projects with enthusiasm and terrible at following through with actual work. But she was my sister, and despite everything, I wanted to believe in her, wanted to be part of her success, wanted that investment to finally bridge the gap between us. NSOI caved, wiring $15,000 from my carefully saved bakery profits to keep her dream alive. Months passed, then a full year, then 2 years, and not a single dime came back to me. Natalie dodged my calls, ignored my emails asking for basic updates, and when I managed to corner her at family events, she'd brush me off with vague excuses about cash flow issues and market fluctuations and timing challenges. Dad, of course, never questioned her. He'd just nod wisely whenever Natalie explained away another failure or missed deadline, saying, quote, "She's building something important. These things take time. She's got vision." This birthday party for Dad had been entirely Natalie's production, her stage, her moment to shine. She'd booked the most expensive Italian restaurant in Portland, with crystal chandeliers sparkling overhead and waiters who moved like they were performing choreographed ballet. Every single detail screamed her name, and her aesthetic NTHE custom-printed menu cards with Dad's name in elegant calligraphy. The live jazz trio she'd hired at probably astronomical cost. Even the elaborate floral centerpieces she'd ordered from my direct competitor across town. Deliberately, I realize now, choosing anyone's flowers but mine. And I'd spent 3 days crafting a special birthday cake for Dad, a complex chocolate and raspberry creation with his favorite flavors, decorated with hand-piped details that showcased techniques I'd spent years perfecting. When I presented it to him, he barely glanced at it before setting it aside on a crowded side table, already focused on Natalie's entrance. Then Natalie swept into the room like royalty, presenting Dad with an expensive engraved watch and a leather presentation box. And his entire face lit up with genuine joy. He hugged her tightly, actually getting emotional as he called it. Absolutely perfect for a man of my stature and achievements. NTHE room applauded enthusiastically, and I felt my chest physically tighten as I watched my carefully crafted cake. Hours of work, chosen specifically for his preferences, completely forgotten in the glow of Natalie's perfectly timed, professionally wrapped gift. I'd always known my place in this family, but that moment hit differently, harder. The favoritism I'd rationalized and minimized my entire life was suddenly impossible to deny or excuse. Natalie's every move that evening was calculated with precision. From the way she orchestrated the toasts, to the way she steered conversations, to constantly highlight her jewelry business's bright future and exciting developments, she made absolutely certain that every guest in that room knew she was the star, the success story, the child worth celebrating. NHER laughter was always the loudest in any conversation. Her stories were always the most dramatic and engaging. She had perfected the art of making herself the center of attention while simultaneously making everyone else feel lucky to be in her orbit. Marcus, my younger brother, trailed behind her throughout the evening, echoing her jokes and opinions, while James sipped expensive wine and smirked at Natalie's carefully crafted performance, clearly enjoying watching his wife dominate yet another family gathering. And I sat quietly for most of the dinner, watching the room orbit around Natalie like she was the sun and everyone else were just planets existing to reflect her light. My hands stayed folded in my lap, my comments minimal and polite when anyone bothered to include me in conversation, and I'd brought a backup outfit in my car, a habit developed from years of being the practical, prepared one, always anticipating disasters and having contingency plans. I genuinely didn't expect to need it so soon, didn't anticipate that the disaster would be deliberately orchestrated rather than accidental. NBUT Natalie's planning went far beyond just the menu and music and decorations. She'd orchestrated this entire evening with one specific goal: to humiliate me, to remind me publicly that I would never measure up, to put me in my place in front of witnesses who would validate her superiority. Looking back now with clarity, I can see how she'd set it up: the seating arrangement that put me directly across from her, the timing of her toast, right when everyone was relaxed and receptive, the wine glass she'd been holding at that particular angle for several minutes before she struck. Dad's indifference to my gift and my presence stung deeply, but it wasn't new. I'd been living with his favoritism my entire life. This was just another data point in a decades-long pattern I'd been trying desperately to deny. And I sipped my water throughout dinner, deliberately avoiding the wine, knowing I needed a completely clear head to navigate this minefield of family dynamics. I caught Natalie's glance across the table multiple times, her eyes sharp and assessing, like a predator watching prey, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. NTHE air felt heavy and charged, like the pressure before a thunderstorm breaks. I didn't know exactly what she had planned, but every instinct was screaming that something bad was coming. Natalie's every move that evening was calculated with precision. From the way she orchestrated the toasts, to the way she steered conversations to constantly highlight her jewelry business's bright future and exciting developments, she made absolutely certain that every guest in that room knew she was the star, the success story, the child worth celebrating. NHER laughter was always the loudest in any conversation. Her stories were always the most dramatic and engaging. She had perfected the art of making herself the center of attention while simultaneously making everyone else feel lucky to be in her orbit. And Marcus, my younger brother, trailed behind her throughout the evening, echoing her jokes and opinions, while James sipped expensive wine and smirked at Natalie's carefully crafted performance, clearly enjoying watching his wife dominate yet another family gathering. And I sat quietly for most of the dinner, watching the room orbit around Natalie like she was the sun and everyone else were just planets existing to reflect. My hands stayed folded in my lap, my comments minimal and polite when anyone bothered to include me in conversation. And I'd brought a backup outfit in my car, a habit developed from years of being the practical, prepared one, always anticipating disasters and having contingency plans. I genuinely didn't expect to need it so soon, didn't anticipate that the disaster would be deliberately orchestrated rather than accidental. NBUT Natalie's planning went far beyond just the menu and music and decorations. She'd orchestrated this entire evening with one specific goal: to humiliate me, to remind me publicly that I would never measure up, to put me in my place in front of witnesses who would validate her superiority. Looking back now with clarity, I can see how she'd set it up: the seating arrangement that put me directly across from her, the timing of her toast, right when everyone was relaxed and receptive, the wine glass she'd been holding at that particular angle for several minutes before she struck. Dad's indifference to my gift and my presence stung deeply, but it wasn't new. I'd been living with his favoritism my entire life. This was just another data point in a decades-long pattern I'd been trying desperately to deny. I sipped my water throughout dinner, deliberately avoiding the wine, knowing I needed a completely clear head to navigate this minefield of family dynamics. I caught Natalie's glance across the table multiple times, her eyes sharp and assessing, like a predator watching prey, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. NTHE air felt heavy and charged, like the pressure before a thunderstorm breaks. I didn't know exactly what she had planned, but every instinct was screaming that something bad was coming. When it finally happened, when that wine arced through the air in what felt like slow motion and splashed cold against my dress and skin, the shock wasn't from the liquid or the stain. It was from the naked cruelty in her eyes, the satisfaction in her smile, the calculated nature of this public degradation. "You don't belong in this family," she'd announced, loud enough for every single person in that private dining room to hear clearly. "You never have, and honestly, we're all tired of pretending otherwise." NTHE laughter that followed was the worst part. Not just polite, uncomfortable chuckles, but genuine, harsh laughter. James threw his head back, his guffaw echoing off the walls. Dad looked away quickly, but I saw the slight smile on his lips before he turned. Marcus's nervous laugh joined the chorus, his eyes darting between Natalie and me, clearly uncomfortable, but unwilling to break ranks. And even Dad's colleagues and friends, people I'd known since childhood, joined in with knowing smirks and whispered comments I couldn't quite hear but could easily imagine. And I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't make a scene, or throw wine back at her, or do any of the dramatic things that might have felt satisfying in the moment but would have made me look unhinged and proven whatever point she was trying to make. And instead, I grabbed that cloth napkin, methodically dabbed at the spreading wine stain darkening across my dress, and stood up with deliberate slowness. The scrape of my chair against the polished floor cut through the laughter like a knife. I met Natalie's gaze directly, my expression completely blank, refusing to give her the emotional reaction she was clearly seeking. Then I turned and walked toward the exit, my heels clicking with measured precision on those tiles, feeling every eye in the room boring into my back, hearing Natalie's voice still making jokes at my expense as the restaurant door swung shut behind me. In my car, I sat for several long minutes in the parking structure, the city lights casting strange shadows across the dashboard, my hands gripping the steering wheel as I processed what had just happened. NTHE humiliation itself wasn't new. I'd been experiencing smaller versions of this, but tonight it had crystallized into something different, something that finally broke through my years of denial and people-pleasing. This wasn't just casual family dysfunction or sibling rivalry. This was deliberate, calculated cruelty. This was a declaration of war, a line drawn so clearly that I couldn't pretend not to see it anymore. And I drove home through Portland's rain-slick streets, my mind racing but surprisingly calm underneath the shock. I knew exactly what I needed to do, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to hesitate or second-guess myself into paralysis. At my apartment, I kicked off my wine-stained shoes and went straight to my laptop, not even bothering to change out of the ruined dress. The contract for Natalie's jewelry business stared back at me from my files, a digital chain I'd let bind me for 3 long years, keeping me connected to someone who clearly despised me. She'd begged for my investment back then, sitting in my bakery after hours, tears in her eyes as she painted pictures of her dreams and potential. She'd promised partnership, sisterhood, shared success. She'd said my money would be the foundation of something we'd build together. NMY $15,000, scraped together from months of bakery profits. Money I'd been saving for equipment upgrades and possibly a second location, had propped up her handcrafted jewelry operation, funding her silver supplies, her gemstone purchases, her booth fees at artisan markets, her social media advertising campaigns. Meanwhile, she'd dismissed my bakery publicly as Olivia's cute little baking hobby while privately relying on my hobby. The terms were absolutely clear. Either party could withdraw from the agreement with 30 days written notice. I could end this with a single email. NMY fingers hovered over the keyboard for just a moment, a final pause before I crossed this bridge and burned it completely behind me. Then I typed my words, professional and final, N. Natalie, and effective immediately. I am exercising my right to terminate our investment agreement per Section 7.2. I am withdrawing all financial support for your business. The 30-day notice period begins today. Please do not contact me to discuss this decision. It is final. Olivia, and I hit send, that soft click of the key sounding impossibly loud in the quiet of my apartment. The email whooshed away into the digital void, carrying with it 3 years of being used, dismissed, and humiliated. NTHE weight didn't immediately lift. That's not how these things work. But something did shift fundamentally inside me. I wasn't just cutting a financial tie or ending a business relationship. I was severing years of accepting scraps, of swallowing my pride to keep family peace, of prioritizing everyone else's comfort over my own dignity. Natalie's jewelry business had been barely surviving, even with my steady financial support. Without my $15,000 acting as a cushion, her supply chain would immediately start stalling. Her pending orders would pile up as she couldn't afford to purchase materials. The small business loan she'd taken out last year, the one I'd co-signed for against my better judgment, would come due next month, and she'd have no way to make the payment. NHER investors, the small group of friends and acquaintances she'd convinced to put money into her operation with promises of returns that never materialized, would start asking uncomfortable questions about where their money had actually gone. I could already imagine her checking her email late that night, her face going pale as she read my message, the reality of her situation sinking in like cold water. Her safety net, reliable, responsible Olivia who always came through, was suddenly gone, and I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling of my small apartment, the place I'd been able to afford because my bakery actually made money, unlike Natalie's perpetually struggling venture that everyone insisted on calling successful. NFOR the first time in years, I felt like I was standing on solid ground instead of constantly trying to earn my place at a table where I'd never actually been welcome, and I didn't sleep much that night. My mind kept replaying the dinner, Natalie's smirk, Dad's deliberate look away, Marcus's uncomfortable laugh, James's obvious enjoyment of my humiliation. But I wasn't consumed by anger. Anger would have been too hot, too reactive, too easy. And this was something colder and sharper, a resolve I hadn't known I possessed, a clarity about my own worth that had been buried under decades of trying to be good enough for people who would never see me that way. I thought about Marcus and his hesitant participation in my humiliation. Part of me wanted to believe he'd been uncomfortable, that he'd only laughed because he didn't know how to stand up to Natalie. But his discomfort didn't change his choice. He'd chosen her side, just like he always did. And nays for Dad. His silence spoke more eloquently than any words could have. He'd chosen his favorite daughter decades ago, and nothing I achieved or sacrificed would ever change that fundamental preference. By 10 a.m. the next morning, my doorbell was ringing insistently, aggressively. I looked through the peephole and saw James standing there, his expensive suit already rumpled despite the early hour, his face pale and tight with barely concealed panic. And I opened the door but didn't invite him in, just leaned against the frame with my arms crossed, my expression deliberately neutral and cold. "And Olivia, we need to talk." James started, his voice clipped and urgent, skipping any pretense of apology or politeness. "You need to reinstate that investment contract immediately. Natalie's business can't function without your capital. You understand that, right? This isn't just about you being upset over some wine at dinner." Some wine at dinner. That's how he characterized his wife's public humiliation of me, as if it were an accidental spill rather than calculated cruelty. "You're standing on my doorstep asking for favors," I said slowly, each word deliberate. "After last night. After your wife threw wine on me and announced I don't belong in my own family while you laughed. And now you want money." NHE shifted his weight uncomfortably, his businessman facade cracking slightly. "Look, what happened at dinner was..." Natalie was stressed about the business. She meant every word. I cut him off, my voice sharp. "And so do I. I'm done bailing her out. I'm done funding a business that's been failing for 3 years, while she tells everyone my successful bakery is just a hobby." "You're being incredibly selfish," James said, his tone shifting to something harder, more threatening. "Family is supposed to support each other. Your father is very disappointed in you right now." "My father," I said coldly, "has been disappointed in me since birth because I'm not Natalie." "So that's not exactly new information." James and I stepped back and shut the door firmly, his protests muffled behind the solid wood. Through the peephole, I watched him stand there for another minute, clearly debating whether to ring the bell again, before finally walking away with his shoulders hunched. Back inside, I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking slightly, not with fear or doubt, but with adrenaline and something that felt uncomfortably like vindication. Something about James's urgency and panic felt off, like there was more at stake here than just my relatively modest investment. And I opened my laptop and started digging deeper into Natalie's business finances, using the access I still technically had as an investor. What I found made my stomach drop. NSHE hadn't just been using my money as operating capital. She'd been using it to cover personal expenses, rent, car payments, luxury purchases I could see on her credit card statements that were linked to the business account. She'd been treating my investment like her personal ATM, blurring the lines between business and personal finances in ways that were definitely unethical and possibly illegal. NBUT. There was something else, something I couldn't quite pin down. Gaps in her accounting that didn't make sense, vendor payments that seemed inflated, supply purchases that didn't match her actual inventory. And I needed more information, needed to understand exactly what Natalie had been doing with investor money. Because if James was this panicked about me pulling out $15,000 from a business that supposedly had multiple investors and revenue streams, then something much bigger was wrong. 3 days after I sent that termination email, I was at Sweet Haven early in the morning doing inventory when my phone buzzed with a motion alert from my security system. I'd installed cameras throughout the bakery 6 months ago after a series of small thefts in the neighborhood. Nothing major, just precautionary measures. NTHE alert was from 2:47 a.m., tagged as significant motion detected. I pulled up the footage, expecting to see a homeless person seeking shelter in the doorway, or maybe a raccoon knocking over trash cans. What I saw instead made my blood run cold. NTHE timestamp showed 2:45 a.m. Two figures approached my bakery's front window display, their faces partially visible in the streetlight. Natalie, unmistakable even in a dark hoodie, and someone else I didn't immediately recognize, probably one of her friends. They had spray paint cans. I watched in horror as they spray painted fraud and fake in jagged red letters across my storefront windows, the paint dripping like blood. Then, Natalie picked up what looked like a brick from the sidewalk and smashed it through my beautiful display window, the one I'd had custom made to showcase my pastries, the one that had cost me $3,000. NTHE sound of shattering glass was caught clearly on the audio. Then her companion threw a bag of something, garbage, from the smell I'd noticed that morning, into the display case, covering my carefully arranged cupcakes and pastries with rotting food waste and broken bottles. They kicked over my outdoor A-frame sign that advertised daily specials, stomping on it until the wood splintered. The whole attack lasted maybe 4 minutes, but the damage was comprehensive and clearly personal. Then they ran, disappearing down the street into the darkness. I sat in my office, my breath coming shallow, watching the footage again and again. This wasn't random vandalism or neighborhood crime. This was targeted, personal sabotage designed to hurt me financially and damage my reputation. NTHE word, fraud, spray painted on my windows, that was intended to scare away customers, to plant seeds of doubt about my business. The destruction of my display window, the ruined pastries, the broken sign, all of it calculated to cost me money and hurt my income. And I grabbed my camera and drove immediately to the bakery, even though my assistant manager had already sent me photos of the damage that morning. I needed to document everything myself, needed to see it with my own eyes. NTHE morning sun was harsh and unforgiving against the wreckage. The red spray paint screamed across my windows, fraud in huge letters, impossible to miss. The shattered display window gaped like an open wound, glass scattered across the sidewalk and into the display case. The stench of rotting garbage permeated everything, and my entire morning's pastry display was completely ruined, covered in filth. NMY broken A-frame sign lay in pieces on the sidewalk, the careful hand lettering I'd paid an artist to create now illegible under deep gouges and cracks. And I took photos of everything. The spray paint, the broken glass with measurements showing the size of the damage, the destroyed pastries with clear documentation of financial loss, the broken sign. I photographed everything from multiple angles, making sure I had undeniable proof of every single element of destruction. And a neighbor from the coffee shop next door came out while I was documenting, shaking her head sympathetically. "I heard the crash around 3 a.m., she said. "Saw 2 people running away, but it was too dark to identify them clearly. I'm so sorry this happened to you, Olivia. Your bakery is a neighborhood treasure." NHER words were kind, but all I could think about was the security footage sitting on my phone, the proof that my own sister had deliberately destroyed my business out of spite and revenge. And I estimated the damage quickly in my head. $3,000 minimum for the custom display window. Another $800 for paint removal and window cleaning. At least $500 in ruined product and supplies. The broken sign would cost $400 to replace. Lost business for the days we'd have to close or operate with reduced display space, probably $2,000 at minimum. And this wasn't just vandalism. It was a calculated financial attack, designed to hit me where it would hurt most.
Back in my office, I immediately called the lawyer I'd used for my business formation and lease negotiations, Thomas Park, a methodical, no-nonsense attorney who'd helped me navigate various legal issues over the years. "And Thomas, I need your help with something serious," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "My sister just vandalized my business, and I have everything on video." I emailed him the security footage, the photos of the damage, and a brief timeline of events, starting with the wine incident at Dad's party and ending with this morning's discovery. NHE called me back within 90 minutes, which told me how serious he considered the situation. "And Olivia, this is extremely clear-cut," he said, his usually calm voice tight with what sounded like genuine anger on my behalf. "This is criminal vandalism and possibly business interference. The footage is damning. You can clearly identify your sister. We have grounds for both criminal charges and a civil lawsuit for damages. What are we talking about in terms of process?" I asked, grabbing a notebook to take notes. "We'll file a police report first with this video evidence. That creates an official record and could lead to criminal charges. Simultaneously, we'll file a civil suit against Natalie for property damage, loss of business income, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. With this video, we'll win." NHE paused and I could hear papers rustling. "There's something else. You mentioned she's been using your investment improperly. If we can get documentation of that, we might be able to add fraud charges to the mix. That would significantly strengthen your position. I'll get you everything I can," I promised. And Thomas outlined the next steps. Police report filed immediately, civil suit filed within the week, and discovery process to gather any additional evidence of financial impropriety. "Be prepared for your family to rally around her," he warned. In my experience, families often protect the aggressor and blame the victim for making trouble by pursuing legal action. "I know," I said quietly. "They've been doing that my entire life." And after hanging up with Thomas, I sat for a long moment processing everything. My sister had committed multiple crimes against me: vandalism, property destruction, business interference, all because I'd had the audacity to stop funding her failing business and enabling her superiority complex. Old Olivia would have absorbed this, maybe even found ways to blame herself, to excuse Natalie's behavior as stress or a one-time mistake. But that Olivia had died when that wine hit her dress at Dad's birthday party. This Olivia was done being a victim. This Olivia was going to fight back with every legal tool available.
Before I could even finish processing the vandalism, my phone rang with an unknown Portland number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "And is this Olivia Bennett?" A nervous female voice asked. "Yes, who's calling?" "My name is Diana Torres. I used to work for your sister's jewelry business until about 8 months ago. I need to talk to you about something important, something I should have reported a long time ago." NMY pulse quickened. "What kind of something?" Diana's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, like she was afraid of being overheard. "I have documents showing that Natalie was using your name on fake invoices, and she took out a loan in your name without your permission. I kept copies because I was afraid her illegal activities would somehow come back on me. I can't stay quiet anymore." 20 minutes later, Diana was sitting in my bakery's small office, a folder of documents spread across my desk. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with nervous hands that kept fidgeting with her coffee cup. "I started working for Natalie 2 years ago," she explained. "At first, everything seemed legitimate, but about 6 months in, I noticed discrepancies. She'd create invoices for silver and gemstone supplies that were never actually delivered, but she'd mark them as paid. When I asked about it, she told me it was complicated accounting and not to worry about it." Diana pulled out a stack of papers. "These are copies I made before I quit. Look at this one. It's an invoice for $4,000 worth of sterling silver from a supplier in Seattle. It has your signature at the bottom as the approving investor." And I stared at the signature. It looked like mine, but I'd never seen this invoice before. Never approved any purchase of this size. "I never signed this," I said, my voice tight.
"And I know, because look at this." Diana pulled out another document. "This is the actual purchase she made, $800 worth of silver, not $4,000. She pocketed the difference and used your forged signature to make it look legitimate to her other investors. NSHE showed me more examples. Invoice after invoice with my forged signature, showing large purchases that either never happened or were drastically inflated in cost. Thousands of dollars siphoned off through fraudulent paperwork. NBUT, the worst was yet to come. This, Diana said, pulling out a loan application, is a $25,000 small business loan that Natalie took out 9 months ago. Look at the cosigner section. NMY name. My signature. My social security number. Information for a loan I'd never agreed to, never even known existed. She forged your signature on a bank loan? I felt my hands starting to shake. Indiana nodded miserably. She told me you'd approved it verbally, but were too busy with your bakery to come in and sign, so she was just helping expedite the process. I believed her at the time because you were listed as an investor. But later, after I saw more of her shady practices, I realized she'd probably forged it. Why didn't you report this? Indiana's eyes filled with tears. I was scared. She threatened me when I started asking too many questions, said she'd make sure I never worked in Portland again, that she had connections who could ruin me. I just quit and tried to forget about it. But when I heard through mutual acquaintances about what happened at your father's party, and now this vandalism, I couldn't stay silent anymore. This has gone too far. And I stared at the documents spread across my desk. Proof of systematic fraud, identity theft, embezzlement. This wasn't just Natalie being irresponsible with investor money. This was criminal activity. Diana, I need you to be willing to provide this evidence to my lawyer and possibly testify if this goes to trial. Are you prepared to do that? NSHE nodded, her jaw setting with determination. Yes, I'll do whatever it takes. She needs to be stopped before she hurts more people. And I immediately scanned all of Diana's documents and sent them to Thomas, my fingers steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. This changed everything. This wasn't just vandalism anymore. This was identity theft, fraud, loan fraud, embezzlement, serious felonies that could result in actual prison time. Within 2 hours, Thomas called back, and I could hear the excitement in his usually measured voice. Olivia, this is explosive. We're not just talking about vandalism and property damage anymore. Your sister committed multiple felonies, identity theft, fraud, forgery. With this evidence, we can file criminal charges and a much more substantial civil suit. We're looking at potentially 6 figures in damages when you factor in the loan fraud. What do we do next? I'm contacting the police immediately about the identity theft and loan fraud. This goes beyond civil court. This is criminal territory. We'll file an amended complaint adding these charges. And Olivia? With evidence this strong, there's a very good chance she'll face criminal prosecution. After I hung up, Diana looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. I'm sorry I didn't come forward sooner. You're here now, I said firmly. That's what matters. Thank you for finding the courage to do the right thing. As Diana left, I sat alone in my office, surrounded by evidence of my sister's betrayal. Not just the emotional cruelty I'd endured my whole life, but actual documented criminal activity. NTHE old family narrative was that I was jealous of Natalie, that I resented her success, that I was being dramatic and oversensitive. But now I had proof, undeniable, legal, documented proof, that she was the one who'd been lying, stealing, and manipulating all along, and I was going to make sure everyone knew it.